Okay, very good. Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much. My name is Maitland Muse. I'm the EVP for the Global Channel and Strategic Alliance Program for AppGuard. We're a cybersecurity solution based out of the United States and are very much looking forward to spending a few minutes with you today and sharing a little bit more around why prevention is the best line of defense in terms of your cybersecurity posture. I'll spend the next few minutes sharing some of the highlights that we are all aware of through a variety of attacks that have occurred, different approaches that we use, different techniques, and various challenges that CISOs, CIOs, and CTOs are breached with today in an attempt to get you to feel more comfortable about leveraging prevention as opposed to just detection. So what we know, large and small enterprises all over the world continue to get hit with a variety of attacks that are very difficult for them to manage. Whether it's Lloyd's of London, small municipalities as seen here in Texas, obviously Greek banks having hit with a very large breach. 9 times out of 10, we know that these things occur from human error, ultimately clicking on something that we shouldn't because we have been tricked by malicious actors. We know that cybercrime is hitting an all-time high, and it's projected to hit $6 trillion annually by next year. Worldwide spending continues to go very, very high, expected to reach $133 billion by 2022. 68% of the business leaders feel that their cybersecurity risks are increasing, and they're looking for assistance from subject matter experts like those of us in the cybersecurity industry, as well as internal expertise, which continues to be lacked. The majority of these breaches we know are hacks. 28% are some sort of malware, and more importantly, 32 to 33% of these include phishing. So there are malicious actors who are identifying particular targets or weaknesses or vulnerabilities and finding their way into an enterprise's infrastructure and launching a series of attacks with the goal of holding hostage their information or causing tremendous havoc across the business. We know that 69% of the organizations don't believe that the threats they're seeing can be blocked by antivirus software. And there are reasons, not to say the software is not good, but there are reasons it's very difficult to keep up. I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. 92% of the malware that's out there is delivered by email. That is the vulnerability. Our email goes out into the wild, brings back files, and oftentimes we let our guard down individually and click on something that we're not aware of. So as ransomware continues to increase, our vulnerabilities really continue to open, and decision makers really find themselves struggling on how to manage, how to protect. All of these brands, as you know, on a global basis, have been hit one way or another, either through ransomware or some other malicious activity. But more importantly, several of these have been hit multiple times. So as they continue to add different technologies and solutions to protect their environment, or at least they get the belief that they're adding protection through defense and layers, what they wind up doing is, one, slowing down the performance of their infrastructure, but it's not always best to try to solve these problems by adding more products and seeing what sticks. We know that nearly 1 in 3 malware attacks is a 0-day, and they cannot be detected by traditional antivirus programs. It's really tough for most antivirus programs to just keep up with the velocity. Once they are aware of it, they can stop it once they are aware of it. But with the rapid pace of malware being delivered, developed into the networks, it's very difficult for them to keep up. And at the end of the day, 9 in 10 of these malware threats make their way into an organization through a compromised file download. Again, malicious actors identify vulnerabilities oftentimes through applications and software that we use regularly, and they take advantage of these vulnerabilities and hijack them. As I mentioned, over 1 million new malware attacks are released into the wild. This is very difficult for not only traditional AV, but even the greatest technologies from a machine learning or AI, really challenging for them to keep up with the rapid pace. And they have to rely on signatures or patterns or consistently try to determine what's good from what's bad. Even if they're extremely effective, and let's acknowledge that 97, 98% effective for the most part is pretty good. If my child is a student and they have a 97 average, I'm relatively happy with their performance. Yes, they can do better, but I'd be satisfied if my kids are an A almost plus student. But in cybersecurity, 97% is not enough because, again, looking at 1 million malware attacks, that still leaves roughly 30,000 attacks that get in through the systems under protection in a variety of ways, which then increases the risk that an enterprise has to face. As I've heard several speakers today reference the NIST, the National Institute for Cyber Security Services, NIST guidance for 2020 back in early January, they basically said they issued a framework that suggested enterprises develop a strategy around better detection and responding to these increasing cyber attacks. In essence, they've told the decision makers, do a better job of detecting and then mitigating once you identify. Well, that's an interesting problem because this approach continues to get old. And at the end of the day, what you're faced with doing is mitigating a breach once it occurs. Well, oftentimes, this can cause a lot of problems to a business that are forced to respond, to mitigate, and then focus on their recovery because damage is often done and having a significant impact to the brand in a variety of ways. If customer information has been compromised, now the customer information is out in the wild being used for a whole host of things. The brand that represents, in the cases I noticed, as I referenced earlier, a Marriott. I use a credit card at my Marriott to book my hotel. I may question whether or not to go to that Marriott next time on my business travel. All of these issues continue to mount where ultimately NIST has said get better at detecting beforehand. I would think a logical approach would be to prevent the breach from occurring as opposed to letting it occur and then focusing your efforts more around mitigating after the fact. We know that the difference between protection and detection, there is a huge gap. Again, a rapid pace of new malware being developed, very difficult for anyone to keep up with it, anyone to keep up on the varying techniques of how malicious actors and adversaries get into a system. So what AppGuard focuses on is how to prevent these bad things from happening, to avoid the breach, to avoid the exploit from occurring, that allow you to be more efficient and more secure. This is where we hope to see a huge change, where more businesses focus on preventing before they worry about detecting. Because as we know, and obviously dealing in the crisis we all are today with the global pandemic, if there were a cure for COVID, we would be able to operate much normally. And in fact, this function today would be in person and not virtual. So if you can prevent things, it makes it much easier to manage going forward. And several of the things that we really need to focus our efforts on as we build out a zero trust and again, a more preventive technology is at the end of the day, as a user, while I may live up to my corporate principles, I don't know if I have a down day, if there's something in my training that I just don't follow for that particular day. Applications we know are always flawed because at the end of the day, the last thing that anyone considers when building an application is security, because it slows down development time. And then ultimately at the end, the last thing that we are really challenged in trusting are the endpoints, because it's the culmination of users and applications together, oftentimes opening up a gateway for vulnerabilities and access. Human behavior is costing big money and impact in the cybersecurity industry. With $124 billion spend, billions are spent every year to prevent cyber attacks, yet the cyber attacks continue to increase. Complex technologies, we know, ignore the human element. Most investments in cybersecurity go toward building complex technologies, and we continue to ultimately neglect that the human is at the center of these breaches. Things happen, and we know that things spread very, very quickly. Again, given the current climate and environment that we're in, if we can do a better job internally in preventing things from occurring, obviously we can minimize the damage that occurs inside a business. Keeping in mind, you would think at a time globally when the world is under pressure, malicious actors would back down, but they don't. They take advantage when the world is vulnerable. And as we can see, and we've all held testament to the times, that there's a significant increase in spam messaging that are related to COVID-19. 737 detected malware related to COVID-19, 48,000 malicious URLs related to COVID-19. At the end of the day, what we would expect to be an opportunity for us to kind of get our house in order, we are forced to focus even more aggressively in protecting our ecosystems as we move to remote workers, which may become the norm, 100% remote workers, over the next couple of years until we find a cure, which means these malicious actors will continue to increase their attacks. They will work even harder to exploit the vulnerabilities that exist now with a corporate enterprise user who's now in his remote environment, at home, where his family is often on the same network. Even with a VPN, you're not protected, you're not as secure given the current environment. And again, as noted on this slide, the huge increase, of course, in attacks. And with that, again, increasing third-party risks, which are due to the COVID-19, companies are now sharing additional information with third parties to help validate and protect themselves. And they're actually spending significantly more than they had been in the past to just vet the third-party capabilities. In the end, what we continue to see is organizations have to reach out externally to get new ways to protect and prevent bad guys from getting into their networks. Well, we can bring some help to this. And when we really try to focus around, again, prevention before detection, what we've noticed is that today's methods of cyber attacks continue to evolve. And there creates a need to add multiple layers, multiple technologies in order to provide what we believe to be the best level of protection for our individual enterprises. Well, AppGuard brings a really great approach to preventing the exploit prior to its detonation. And that is a huge difference to, again, if I go back a couple slides, to what NIST has advised, where NIST has suggested detect faster, mitigate quicker, and as I used the cartoon from earlier, make sure whatever damage happens is under the carpet. Well, that's not good enough. And again, I want to be crystal clear here. This is not to say there's anything wrong with today's EDRs and AVs as a technology. All relatively good, relatively strong, but not perfect. And there are still gaps and vulnerabilities that exist with today's technologies. Our goal is to prove that at the end, with AppGuard in an environment, as a complement to some of the other technologies that exist, we act from a hardening perspective, we prevent the breach before it occurs, and then we allow them to do their job, which is remove it. Basically, what is AppGuard? AppGuard is a kernel-based agent that's deployed on the endpoint that's designed to take away an application's ability to be turned against the operating system. Quite honestly, it is that simple. We use a combination of location-based and predetermined policies that establish the proper segmentation within the operating system. We do not rely on any identification, no machine learning, artificial intelligence, whitelisting, sandboxing, or other.
Maitland, I am sorry. Can you make a pause? We don't see your full screen. We see your notes. Please make a full screen of your presentation. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
I wish I had known that earlier, but okay.
Okay, now it is okay. I'm
Okay.
sorry. You can continue. Sorry.
No problem. Okay. So you can see everything okay now?
Everything is okay now. You can continue. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start over from the first slide then, okay?
Okay.
No, I'm only joking. I'm only joking. Okay, so as I was saying here, we use the proper OS segmentation, and then AppGuard looks at where the application is being launched from to ensure that the policies that are in place only enforce the rules that are designated there and prohibit whatever application from doing the things that they're supposed to, what is necessary as opposed to what's not. In the end, we're clearly aware that while there are many, many ways to get into an environment, it is very, very difficult to change what a malicious actor does once he's in. And that's why AppGuard is so effective, because they still try to take over by hiding through an application and getting into the operating system and then moving their way around by launching some sort of a malicious file, which is what AppGuard prevents against. And we do this again through a patented isolation and inheritance technology that starts off through the OS segmentation. And with our OS segmentation in the pre-launch, AppGuard is able to prevent the breaches at the endpoint by blocking. We identify and group applications based on where they are in the OS and ensure that apps can only launch from within the system space unless the trusted exception is granted. That red line that you see to the left is what basically AppGuard guards against by surrounding the applications and guarding the application's behavior. Keep in mind, an extremely light piece of software here added on the endpoint, less than 2 megabytes, has very little impact in the CPU and processing, and barely does not slow down your system, regardless of what other tools you have in place. As we move over into the post-launch and focus on the isolation and inheritance, both of these are patented pieces to our technology and allow AppGuard to guard the apps and their behaviors and prohibit them from writing into areas that they're not supposed to. We guard the high-risk apps and normal applications. And then through that guarding, we also have an inheritance process that goes down to protect against the child processes that occur. I'll explain this more in the next slide, but the key to note here is AppGuard is a part of the entire life cycle of the application and guarding against the application's behavior. We're not slowing down the application. We're not disrupting the user experience whatsoever. But what we are allowing is for the user to act as they do normally, to go through a file, to click on an email, to open a Firefox or whatever web browser, pull in a file, and just completely guard against what that file may contain. I can show this a bit more in this example here. As I mentioned, the user downloads an Outlook email. As you'll notice, the bubble is covering, the AppGuard bubble is covering the Outlook email. As I click the email, it launches a browser into Firefox. Everything is completely fine. But we've now expanded the bubble between Microsoft Outlook and Firefox. At the same time, we've gone out and an Adobe Acrobat reader launched to view a PDF that we retrieved from our link. Everything's fine, nothing appears to be a problem, and AppGuard allows the user to continue with their normal experience. At that point, a just-in-time memory malware process had been launched through that PDF file, and at that point, an attempt to launch that memory process was stopped by AppGuard. Through this, you saw an inheritance process, which is our patent, go through. Our zero trust policy for isolation and inheritance automatically applied our zero trust policies to the child process. Taking a step back, the user was allowed to make the mistake of clicking the email, which they should not have, but we guarded against that error by not allowing the malicious file to open. That level of protection secured the environment, protected the user, and ensured that in no way would the bad file or the malicious malware be able to take over the operating system and hold hostage the files, request ransomware, or anything like this. This is prevention at its finest. And why it's so important is as you look at the things, for example, looking at the cyber kill chain from Lockheed Martin, we come in right between the delivery of a file, which again, AppGuard does not protect how the files get onto the system. We guard against what the files are able to do. So we prevent in a pre-exploit and a pre-detonation phase to ensure that the overall integrity of the operating system is maintained while protecting and guarding that individual user from any malicious activity. Same thing as I'm sure multiple users are getting very familiar with the attack and CQ framework. Pre-attack is not our specialty. We can't stop a file from being side-loaded through a thumb drive, files being emailed. We don't work within the external part of an organization. AppGuard's strength is on protecting the inside of the organization to avoid any of the exploits from occurring. In this case, prevention is so critically important to protecting the enterprise so that the enterprise can operate in the manner that they're accustomed to, continue to guard their brand, minimize and protect all information for their users and their clients, but ultimately not allow malicious files to launch within the operating system. Complete protection, and in fact, from AppGuard's perspective, not one endpoint, which includes Windows workstations, as well as servers and a handful of Linux servers as well, have been breached with AppGuard protection in place. And that's over 10 years that our solution has been out without a breach on record. Something very strong for us to stand behind. And again, all focused on prevention. We make other solutions better as we act as a hardening tool, but ultimately, the more we can focus our efforts on preventing breaches from occurring, the more likelihood an enterprise can focus their areas in other places to ensure they optimize their overall operation. That basically comes to the end of my presentation, and I believe we're open for Q&A now. Let's see, I do see two questions.
Okay.
Maitland, just said they have an echo. Is there still an echo?
Are you finished?
Yes, I am.
Your presentation. We have some problem, but the last your slides was very beautiful and they was more clear. So no problem with echo.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about the mix-up at the beginning, but do we have any questions? And is there still an echo?
Возможно, у кого-то есть вопросы. Уважаемые участники, пишите в чат, и я переведу нашему спикеру ваш вопрос, и если у вас такой есть. We don't have any questions from the audience.
Okay.
Okay, Maitland, thank you very much for your presentation. And now we are waiting for the next speaker.